There's a question that has puzzled countless Chinese people for most of their lives. Why is it that some people, after they fall, can never get back up again, while others can rise from the ruins and rebuild an empire? Today, the person we're going to talk about, his life, is practically a Chinese version of the Shawshank Redemption. He once stood at the pinnacle of Chinese entrepreneurs, the king of tobacco, in Asia, paying 8.5 billion yuan in taxes to the state annually. That's equivalent to the combined annual fiscal revenue of 360 medium-sized agricultural counties. His products monopolized 80% of China's premium cigarette market, making even Marlboro unable to hold its head up high in China. But just as he was about to reach the pinnacle of success, fate suddenly played a cruel joke on him. In 1999, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. At 71, gray-haired, falling from the heights to rock bottom. Even more brutal was that before he went to prison, his only daughter died by suicide in the detention center. If it were you, what would you think? Most likely you'd think, this life is over. My child is gone. My career is gone. My freedom is gone too. A 70-something-year-old man spending the rest of his life in prison. This story should have ended right there. But this old man refused to accept that. He spent over 4 years in prison. And what did he do after getting out? He went to the mountains to grow oranges. 75 years old, released on medical parole, his body riddled with illness. He took all the money his old friends pooled together for him and invested every penny into leasing 2,400 acres of barren mountain land in Yunnan's Alau Mountains. Everyone thought he'd lost his mind. Growing oranges? That thing takes 5 or 6 years to bear fruit. By then he'd be over 80. Would he even live to see the results? He said something that Wang Shi would quote over and over again. Life only truly begins at 60. 5 years later, that barren mountain turned into a gold mine. His oranges sold for over 10 yuan per gene, and demand far exceeded supply. People went crazy trying to get them. By 2014, his Chu orange had annual revenues exceeding 100 million yuan, with net profits of 70 million, several times higher than his competitors. He proved one thing with the latter half of his life. Life doesn't give you just one chance. Even if fate throws you into the mud, as long as you're willing, you can still grow flowers in that mud. This person is Chu Shijian. Welcome to the Soft Crash. I'm Fanko. Today, let's dive into the legendary life of this phoenix and see exactly how he forged his extraordinary journey. Chu Shijian was born in Yunnan in 1928. His ancestors migrated from Hainan to Yunnan during the Xianfeng era of the Qing dynasty, when they were conscripted to serve in Yunnan. And, from then on, they settled down there. By his grandfather's generation, they were doing pretty well. His grandfather was extremely capable. He spent money to purchase the title of Jiansheng, buying himself a minor official status. He also secured from the government the positions of village head and local militia leader. His grandfather had 3 sons and 1 daughter. Chu Shijian's father was named Chu Kaiyun, the 4th in birth order. That's right, exactly those 2 characters. You're thinking of a great start, everything going smoothly. Their family lived in a small mountain village, but fortunately, there was a railway line next to the village. Because that area was close to the border, there was a fair amount of trade coming and going. To get rich, first build roads. This railway was an important gateway connecting their family to the outside world, keeping them from being too isolated. Chu Kaiyun was in the timber business, buying logs from the mountains and selling them to the tin mines. This ongoing trade provided enough to support his large family. Chu Shijian had 2 older brothers above him, but both died young, so he was effectively the eldest. Below him were 4 younger brothers and 1 younger sister. Back then, Chu Shijian lived quite a happy life. School was 2.5 kilometers away, and he didn't want to walk. So, what did he do? He hopped on trains. Every time, he'd catch that train with perfect precision. But what about when the train didn't stop at the station? On the way home, he'd drift back home not on a raft, but by swimming back himself. He was an excellent swimmer. He'd balance his backpack on top of his head, wrap it with cloth strips a few times, looking like a turtle, and after getting home, the backpack wouldn't be wet at all. Sometimes, he'd even catch a couple of fish along the way to bring home. Speaking of catching fish, this was his greatest passion throughout his entire life. He especially loved catching fish, and his technique was incredibly sharp. He never missed a catch. But the happy days didn't last long. In 1942, the Japanese bombed the Yunnan-Vietnam Railway, and his father was caught in the blast wave and severely injured. A year later, his father passed away. That year, his father was only 42 years old, and Chu Shijian was 15. The youngest brother in the family, Chu Shijian, wasn't even 1 year old yet. Can you imagine that scene? A 15-year-old boy standing at his father's grave, looking back at his 6 siblings and a mother who couldn't manage the household. From that moment on, he became the pillar of the family. In the years that followed, fate showed no mercy to this household. When he was in middle school, his 4th and 5th younger brothers both died from dysentery that couldn't be cured. A bit later, another brother was killed in the campaign to suppress bandits. So in the end, he had very few siblings left. But the family still had some assets to fall back on. 2 or 3 acres of paddy fields they farmed themselves, and over 10 acres of dry land in the mountains that they rented out. They could collect some rent each year, though actually it wasn't cash they collected, just grain that the tenants handed over as rent after harvesting their crops. But relying solely on his mother to manage all these things was extremely difficult. Fortunately, the family had a small distillery. Chu Shijian began learning how to brew liquor. You might think, what's so impressive about making wine? But it was precisely this that gave him his first profound understanding of cost and efficiency. He discovered a problem. Why did it take 3 pounds of corn for some families to distill 1 pound of liquor, while others could do better? He started thinking about it. While working, he observed, and while observing, he took notes. He carried a small notebook with him, writing down every detail, every number. What's the optimal temperature? How long should the fermentation last? Which step could save some time? Where could materials be conserved? Improve, then improve again. In the end, he increased the yield to 1 gin of liquor from every 2.5 gin of corn. That saved him a full half gin of raw materials compared to others. And the quality of the liquor was even better. Once the liquor was brewed, he still had to sell it. He'd carry his baskets on a shoulder pole to the market, and his mind started working again. He noticed, if he brought too much each time, he couldn't sell it all. If he brought too little, he wouldn't have enough to sell. What to do? He started adjusting the quantity he'd bring next time, based on the previous sales performance. Each time, he would bring slightly more or slightly less than the estimated amount, creating a scarcity effect every time people felt his wine was selling incredibly fast. Next time, people would be eagerly waiting to snatch up his liquor. What's even more brilliant is this: when it was time to close up shop and the quality of the remaining liquor wasn't as good, he'd immediately slash the price, never stubbornly holding out, never being reluctant to let go. The result? Not only did his wine sell fast, but his reputation was exceptionally good. This was the business enlightenment of a 15-year-old boy. He later summed it up by saying, "When you're in material production, you absolutely must get cost accounting right. Everything has its underlying patterns, and once you figure out those patterns, the solutions naturally emerge. If you just keep your head down working without using your brain, even when you've exhausted all your energy, you still might not get results. Does this principle sound simple? Simple. It is. But how many people actually do it? Yet if things had continued this way, Chu Shijian's life would probably have been confined to this small mountain village. Farm a little land, brew some wine, marry a wife, have kids, and then die of old age, right there. But fate had a turning point in store for him. His uncle had a cousin who was the eldest brother in the entire clan. From childhood, this cousin was exceptionally smart and remarkably mature, and Chu Shijian deeply admired him. One year, this cousin specifically came to find him and urged him to come out of retirement. He didn't go into detail about what was said, only mentioning that my cousin was particularly good with words, and in just a few sentences, he made me understand the principles of life. The conclusion was, you can't stay in these mountains, you have to get out. Come with me to Kunming to study. His uncle was the district chief of the neighboring district at the time, and his cousin was even more impressive. After graduating from high school, his cousin took the entrance exam for Southwest Associated University. At that time, there were 7,000 or 8,000 people from the entire Kunming area taking the test, and only 2 were admitted in total. His cousin accounted for 50% of them. So when his cousin urged him like this, Chu Shijian listened, and so he followed his cousin to Kunming. That year was 1944, and he was 16 years old. Before going to Kunming, he did one more thing. He changed his name. What was his original name? It was Chu Shi. Yes, E as in Russia. How did that come about? His elementary school teacher gave him that name. He belonged to the Shi generation, and his name had to include the single-person radical. The teacher only had one radical to work with, so he picked the character E from Russia. His father didn't like it at all, thought the name sounded like a little girl's. The teacher said, "You just don't get it. Russia, a great power, impressive." Only later did they find out that the teacher was a Communist Party member with pro-Russian sentiments. But Chu Shijian himself didn't like that name, so right before leaving for Kunming, he changed it to Chu Shijian, using the character Jian from the phrase, "as heaven's movement is ever vigorous." Still keeping the character with the person radical, following ancestral tradition, but it sounded much more powerful now. Hands in pockets, not knowing what an opponent even means. At 16, Chu Shijian entered the next phase of his life. The years he went to Kunming happened to coincide with a special historical period, the Southwest Associated University. This school needs no introduction. It sounds like a southwestern institution, but it was actually 3 northern schools. China's 3 best universities: Peking University, Tsinghua University, Nankai University. During the war, these 3 universities relocated to Kunming and formed the Southwest Associated University. Yang Chen-ning, Huang Kun, the founding father of Chinese semiconductors. You could basically say that many of China's contemporary academic disciplines were established at that school. What's behind the cultivation of so many talents? Absolutely reliable teaching faculty. At that time at Southwest Associated University, these teachers still faced some difficulties in their daily lives. So to make ends meet, some of them would moonlight teaching at private middle schools to earn extra income. Talk about academic talent going completely to waste, right? These overqualified professors were teaching high school just to get by. Chu Shijian really lucked out here. Several of his teachers had actually come from Southwest Associated University. And back then, what they learned wasn't just textbook knowledge, it was curiosity about knowledge itself, the habit of learning, and the ability to think critically. They were learning methodology. What he learned from these great teachers was completely different. From middle school onward, he developed the habit of reading every day. No matter what kind of environment came later, whether favorable or adverse. He basically always kept a few books by his bedside and had a fixed time each day to flip through them and learn something. And there's another thing among these prominent families. Quite a few were revolutionaries, perhaps influenced by them to some degree. He joined the revolution while still in school. By 1948, areas across the country were gradually being liberated, but Yunnan was relatively remote and still caught up in fighting. The nationalists had two military forces in Yunnan at that time, which posed great danger to them. In mid-1948, their superiors notified him and a group of classmates, "The nationalists are about to start arresting people again. You all need to go home quickly and lay low for a while." So that year, after just 1 year of high school, he said goodbye to Kunming and returned to his hometown, Huaning, together with his older cousin and a younger cousin. What did he do after going back home? He became a teacher at that same elementary school where he'd once hopped the train, teaching by day while also doing underground work on the side. Back then, he even had a little street nickname. People called him Black Cat. Why Black Cat? Probably because he was particularly good at slacking off. So this job didn't last very long either, less than half a year. Because he helped the guerrilla fighters escape the nationalist troops' pursuit by getting them across a river, he feared the nationalists would come after him for revenge. In the dead of night, he rushed home, hastily said goodbye to his family, and left directly with the guerrillas. By the following year, July 1949, the Central Military Commission officially organized the various guerrilla forces in Yunnan into the Chinese People's Liberation Army, Yunnan Guangxi Guizhou Border Column. Chu Shijian officially joined this border column and became a soldier. And because he truly was outstanding, it wasn't long before the company commander took notice of him and made him the company's political instructor. After he became the instructor, there was never another case of personnel loss in the company. This was no small feat. Many of the troops assembled back then had members with relatively low education levels and rather weak ideological foundations. People backing out and quitting happened all the time, every few days. Right in the middle of fighting, they'd just lose the will to go on and slip away without a word. The battles back then were incredibly brutal. His second brother, Chu Shijian, was shot and killed during a Kuomintang surprise attack. His cousin Chu Shijian died in combat in 1950 while marching into Tibet, just when victory was within sight. He could hold an entire company together. A young guy barely in his 20s without some real ability, people simply wouldn't respect him. By February 1950, all of Yunnan province was liberated. He left the military and was assigned to work in Yiliang County, Kunming, about 100 kilometers from his hometown. At that time, he was doing grain requisition work. Right after liberation, the fighting hadn't completely settled down yet, and over 100,000 PLA troops had entered Yunnan. 100,000 mouths to feed, horses to provision, and the new government also had to support the nationalist troops who had surrendered, plus the original members of the border column forces. All told, Yunnan had to feed 400,000 mouths. The pressure was immense, and grain requisition was absolutely necessary. But requisitioning grain, easier said than done. The common people supported the Communist Party on one hand, but on the other hand, the Nationalist Party had already collected taxes once this year. You driving them away is a good thing, but asking me to pay again, I really don't want to. In many places, the common people were resistant, and in some areas, there was even unrest. On top of that, remnants of the Kuomintang were stirring up trouble, making things very difficult to handle. But Chu Shijian's grain requisition work always went exceptionally smoothly. When a village assigned him a grain requisition task with a 2-month deadline, he'd get it done in just 10 days. Why? This was directly connected to his earlier work as an instructor doing ideological education. When he talked with people, He never spouted grand theories or lofty rhetoric. He could grasp what was on the other person's mind and get right to the point in just a few words, making everything clear and understood. Later he said, "When you talk to people, you have to think from their perspective on everything. You have to consider things from their point of view. If you genuinely consider their interests, and they feel it, everything becomes negotiable. But if you try to force things, who's going to respect you? During the day, you shove a rifle in their face to force them to comply, but by nighttime, they'll rise up against you and have you tied up." His success in grain collection in Yunnan County quickly spread his reputation far and wide. How far, exactly? Word spread so far that leaders from his hometown of Huaning, over 100 kilometers away, took notice of him. One time, when he went home to visit family, the leadership took the opportunity to tell him, "Don't leave, stay here. Any piece of ground is good enough to be buried in, right?" And just like that, they kept him there. "Don't worry about anything else. I'll handle all your transfer paperwork for you." What was the job? Grain collection again. He was good at it, so they had him keep doing it. As you can imagine, the results were good. Not only did he do his own job well, he also gave suggestions to the leadership. After the entire Huaning County followed his advice, the county's tasks were completed very quickly. So, taking another step forward from this success, in 1952, he became the district head of the local Panxi district and officially joined the Chinese Communist Party. Joining the party wasn't easy back then. More than 20 years later, the Huaning County Committee even had someone reach out to him. "Would you like to come back and serve as county party secretary?" Although he didn't end up going, it was enough to show just how deep an impression he'd left on the locals. After finishing party school, he went straight to Yushi. From 1954 to 1958, nearly 5 years, this was his golden years, from age 26 to 30. At the Yuxi Prefectural Committee office, he first worked in propaganda, then moved to personnel. He could feel himself becoming increasingly important. And there was something even more significant. In 1957, when the large-scale anti-rightist campaign began, he was immediately appointed as deputy leader of the local political and legal system's anti-rightist group, basically put in charge of the most critical matters. He was put in charge. But he did this job poorly. According to the directive guidelines at the time, the quota for rightists was supposed to be 5% to 10%. In the Yuxi region's political and legal system, there were over 600 people. When the lists submitted by units at all levels were tallied up, there were more than 160 names. This already exceeded a 20% ratio. That was way too high. He couldn't bear it. Looking at those names, many were people he'd dealt with, people he knew. How could they possibly be rightists? So he discussed it with his partner, and they cut down about half the list, ultimately keeping around 80 people. Doing the math, that still made the rightist ratio about 13%, which wasn't a small number either. But even at 13%, it got him into trouble. He was accused of sympathizing with rightists. That was the special era we're talking about. By 1958, he himself was labeled a rightist too. What's even more lamentable is that the following year, in 1959, remember that cousin of his? After graduating from Southwest Associated University, he went to work at the Yunnan Provincial Power Supply Bureau, only to be labeled as a middle right, meaning center right, which still counted as a rightist. According to what his colleagues later said, his cousin was actually a talented and distinguished individual, a candidate being groomed for the position of Provincial Power Bureau Director. But because he didn't have a good personal relationship with the bureau chief at the time, he was targeted and brought down. During that special period, if you offended someone, they could easily fabricate charges against you. Once labeled a rightist, you'd be sent down to a farm for labor reform. And then came the 3 years of natural disasters on top of everything. with barely enough to eat. His cousin, a scholar, developed liver disease and didn't get treatment in time. He passed away after just 6 months or so. It was heartbreaking. Such a precious talent, a pillar of the nation that took so long to cultivate, just gone like that. Actually, Chu Shijian himself nearly didn't make it through either. Labeled as a rightist, sent off to a farm for labor reform. What kind of environment was that? Never enough to eat, endless work to do, and the people around you too scared to even speak to you. Once he came down with malaria, and when he got up in the morning, blood started gushing from his nose and mouth, and he just lay there in the cowshed, unable to move. People passing by didn't dare even glance at him. Who would dare show sympathy? In those days, sympathizing with a rightist was itself a crime. He nearly didn't make it through that time. Fortunately, when the farm doctor heard someone in the cowshed was barely hanging on, he rushed over and saved his life. Looking back, this was also fate. Back when this doctor first returned to China, he was accused of being a spy. But when Chu Shijian dealt with him and met him face to face, he could tell right away the man wasn't a spy at all. He'd been framed by someone. So he spoke up for him and saved him. The doctor remembered his kindness. The doctor had kept 3 precious imported malaria medication pills in his medical kit for years, and he took out 2 of them to save his life. This is what they call doing good deeds without expecting anything in return. 20 years later, when Chu Shijian had made it big, he didn't forget about that doctor. When the doctor returned to his hometown and couldn't find suitable work, Chu said, "Come, work for me." And the doctor stayed with him until retirement. But of course, that's getting ahead of ourselves. At the moment, the main challenge was how to endure the labor reform. As he put it, "I never let myself be defeated." The most pressing challenge at that moment was still how to endure the labor reform. As he put it, "I never let myself be defeated." Others may try to bring you down, and you can't control that, but you can make sure you don't bring yourself down. During those years, he kept doing whatever needed to be done, just like always. While all those other rightists spent their days sighing and looking miserable, unable to think about doing anything, he would still try to encourage them. "There's no use in being like this. What good does sulking do you? Whatever work needs doing, just do it solid, steady, calm, and focused on doing things right. Don't worry about what you can't control otherwise. What's your value? Wouldn't you truly be destroyed then?" This mindset was incredibly strong. What was he trying to accomplish? Still thinking, he said, "Look, life on this farm is just too hard. Can we make it a little bit better?" So he suggested to the farm leadership, "After we complete the tasks mandated by the state, could we possibly have some energy left over to do a bit more on our own?" They grew sugarcane there, and after delivering the quota required by the state, there was still a little left over. Could they use it to make sugar? The leadership at the time was single-mindedly focused on politics and had no energy to deal with him. "Go ahead and do it." "Fine." So he took the sugarcane to make sugar. After pressing it, there was still a bit of sugar left inside. So he took the sugarcane pulp to distill liquor. This was his traditional skill, something he'd practiced since he was a kid. The liquor he distilled wasn't for the people on the farm to drink. He used it to barter with local farmers for food. The local ethnic minority farmers particularly loved drinking alcohol, which perfectly hit the nail on their needs. And not only did he do all that, he also cleared land to grow vegetables and raised a flock of ducks. This was a small romantic comfort for him in the midst of a hard life. In his wife's words later on, no matter where he went, he could always make a good life for himself. What do you call this? A beggar raising a parrot, finding joy in hardship. Let's continue and see why he could have such a romantic state of mind. On one hand, he himself was strong enough. On the other hand, he had a very important pillar of support: his wife, Ma Jingfen. In those days, many wives of rightists couldn't endure the hardship, and they had no choice but to divorce. Back then, if his wife had said she wanted to leave, he wouldn't have said a word and would have agreed for sure, because what could he possibly say? But instead, his wife took their daughter and went straight to the labor farm to be with him. He said that without his wife by his side during those years, including the 10 years of the special period that followed, he wouldn't have made it through. True love is tested in times of hardship. But even with someone by his side, reality was still incredibly difficult. Just days after his wife brought the child there, Chu Shijian was sent up the mountain to dig bamboo shoots, and once he left, it was for several days at a time. During the day, it wasn't so bad. But once night fell, his wife was there with the child, staying in that shack he'd built halfway up the mountain for clearing land, planting crops, and raising ducks. That shack leaked wind and rain from all sides, with no one around and no proper houses nearby. Just imagine how terrified a woman would be, alone with a child. One night, just as she was about to go to sleep, she opened her eyes and saw a snake coiled on the roof beam. She was scared to death, didn't dare move a muscle, just stared at that snake, stared at it all night long. The entire night, didn't dare close her eyes. There were just too many incidents like this, extremely harsh conditions. But in such harsh conditions, when Chu Shijian looked back years later, this is how he surprisingly summed it up. By all accounts, that was a major setback. But look at everything I gained from that experience. Shouldn't I also say thank you to those years? What did he gain from it all? Unwavering perseverance, the ability to find joy amid hardship, and this steadfast, unwavering love. By 1961, the label was finally removed. But at that time, even when the label was removed, it wasn't done thoroughly enough. Sure, they'd taken off your hat, but after all, you had been branded a rightist before. At any moment, if you weren't careful, they could drag you back out for another round of public criticism. After the label was removed, work assignments were rearranged. First, he went to a livestock farm as deputy director, but before long, the livestock farm collapsed. Then he was sent to an agricultural farm, and in less than a year, that farm was disbanded too. At that time, most of these factories were basically on the verge of collapse. So, where did they send him next? They sent him to a sugar factory. That year, he was 35 years old, and he arrived at the next turning point in his life. They grew a lot of sugarcane in that area, and once the sugarcane was grown, it was used to make sugar. But for the leaders of state-owned factories, it was basically a case of overstaffing and going through the motions. Just complete the tasks, follow the routine procedures, and fulfill the quotas assigned by the state. And didn't think much about efficiency or benefits. The state didn't require that. In that era, there basically wasn't a free market, and nobody was thinking about real business matters. But Chu Shijian was different. Eat, in, and. Once he committed to something in his life, he went all in. He had to do it big and get it done right. After arriving, he first looked for the problems, and the issues were glaringly obvious. The sugar factory was losing money year after year. The mission was accomplished, but they still had to ask the government to pour money into it. Every year, the county treasury had to subsidize over 200,000 yuan just to keep the sugar factory running. What to do? First, understand the situation through investigation and research. Get a clear picture of the reasons behind it. After a month of observation and going around, he had a pretty good idea. Why were they losing money? Costs weren't under control. He pulled out a small notebook and, in front of everyone, worked through the numbers. Currently, 100 jin of sugarcane yields 9 jin of sugar, a 9% sugar extraction rate. 1 jin of sugar requires 5 jin and 4 liang of fuel, plus labor costs, transportation fees, and machinery depreciation. It would be a miracle if we didn't lose money. We're definitely operating at a loss. So, what do we do? Don't worry, I'll figure out a way for you. We'll take it step by step, cut costs, and boost efficiency. On the cost-saving front, he completely overhauled everything, from the sugar boiling pots to the fuel. The most interesting part was a small detail. He discovered that the sugar boiling pot, after being used for so many years, had accumulated ash at the bottom that was incredibly thick, a full 3 meters thick. He said if you scrape off this ash, the heat efficiency would be much higher. Otherwise, just think about how much effort it takes to heat up all that ash first. It's just a small detail, like this. Before, nobody thought about this stuff. Without orders from above, who would care? These are all minor things that he could figure out himself, just by looking. On one hand, he had to observe and figure things out himself. On the other hand, he needed to find people who knew what they were doing and learn from them. He sent people out to learn, brought in talent from outside, and went on inspection tours himself to see how those well-run sugar factories operated. As soon as he got there and took a look, he immediately had this feeling. Wow, their equipment is really good, so much better than ours. Could we buy this equipment? No way, we couldn't afford it. It was just too expensive. Just when he was feeling anxious, he wandered into the backyard of the sugar factory he was visiting and took a look. Wow, they had several old pieces of equipment that had been retired from service. So he negotiated with the factory manager there. Hey, could you sell me these old ones as scrap metal? You're not using them anyway. The factory director over there heard this and said, Hey, you've got a good eye. You know your stuff. Just because you know your stuff, I won't charge you a dime, not even the scrap metal price. I'm giving it to you for free. Take it. He was overjoyed. He hauled it back, fixed it up, and actually put it to use. Once it was in operation, the overall fuel consumption rate dropped dramatically. Originally, it took over 5 jin of fuel to produce 1 jin of sugar, but after the improvements, it only took 8 liang, roughly 1/7 of what it used to be. And the sugar quality improved 2 more premium grade product, which sold at higher prices. Overall costs were slashed dramatically. That's on the production side. Beyond this area, he also had to consider another problem, the raw material side. You can only produce as much sugar as the materials I give you. So where exactly do these materials come from? The local sugarcane cultivation on one hand, how much volume there was, and on the other hand, the quality of the sugarcane grown, both directly impacted the final efficiency and quality of sugar production. So he went to the local area to study and look around. As soon as he started looking, he discovered the problem. The surrounding area had many sugarcane fields with decent yields, but they couldn't make use of them. Why? Because vehicles couldn't get in. A lot of the sugarcane was even rotting in the fields. He thought it was such a waste. You don't have roads and can't get vehicles in or transport crops out? I'll build you roads. He went straight to the factory to apply for funding and built these roads for the local people, enabling them to transport out what previously couldn't be moved. And seeing that this method worked, he found even more places, went to negotiate with the local village leaders. I'll help you build the roads. You mobilize the villagers to grow sugarcane for me. For the locals who didn't want to plant, he had another trick up his sleeve. Remember what we mentioned earlier? He could use the sugarcane residue to brew liquor. The alcohol he distilled, he'd trade with the local villagers. If you plant sugarcane, the more you plant, then when the time comes, we'll sell each household an extra 3 caddies of liquor. The common people heard this and were immediately motivated into action. With these 3 swift moves, they added hundreds of tons of sugarcane supply each year, and just like that, the problem was solved. Years later, when he reflected on this experience, he said, Through this whole thing, I became even more convinced of one principle. If you want to make something big happen, you have to make sure that every person at every stage of the chain can make money and benefit from it. It's the simplest principle imaginable, except not everyone actually puts it into practice. How did this approach work out? 1 year after he took office as deputy factory manager, in the 1963 to 1964 fiscal year, the factory went from losing over 200,000 the previous year to making a net profit of 117,000 that year. The second year saw a net profit of 200,000, and the third year, 400,000. The entire county's finances were transformed because of this sugar factory. Over those 3 years, they made an extra 600,000 yuan altogether at that time. This was practically a legend. Then came 1966, another special period was about to begin. A decade-long special period. You know, as a former rightist, technically called a cap-removed rightist, during those 10 years, he was someone who could be dragged out and struggled against at any moment. But he was never struggled against, not even once. Why? On one hand, it was about relationships. He had treated people well before, so there were genuine feelings there. He later said that small mountain villages had their advantages. The common folk were relatively more simple and honest. Although there were struggle sessions, people basically still put themselves in each other's shoes. On the other hand, and more importantly, the slogan at the time was, "Grasp revolution, promote production." It wasn't just about revolution. The production aspect was also very important. The main leaders went off to do revolution, but someone still had to manage production. He'd been doing this for so many years, and doing it so well, everyone knew in their hearts that if they got rid of him, the factory would collapse. No matter how much they fight me, I still need the workers below to support me. If the factory collapses, the workers will come after me. So he was solid as a rock. Back then, with the two factions fighting, he was often called upon to pick a side and make his position clear. That was dangerous. Choosing wrong could mean serious trouble. But Chu Shijian never spoke up, never said a word. Having gone through so much by that point, he'd long since figured it out. 100 victories in battle aren't worth one act of restraint. 10,000 perfect words aren't worth one moment of silence. Keeping silent, silence is golden. But saying nothing also offended people. Those rebel faction leaders would post big character posters denouncing him, refusing to take a stance. What's that supposed to mean? But each time one faction won and came to power, they would go to him to apologize and self-criticize. "We're sorry. It was a special situation at the time. We had no choice. We had no choice. We didn't mean anything by it. You still need to keep production running smoothly, and we hope you can understand this situation correctly. We can't do without you." When you're strong in your work, you naturally have confidence and leverage. Of course, not everyone understands this principle. Some other rightists found it very strange and envious. What's going on? Nobody's giving you trouble? Are you really that lucky? He said, "I'm not lucky. It's more because of my own hard work. Do you think it's that easy to boost production?" Now, let me tell you about a technical problem. 1 year, right at the most critical time for crushing sugarcane, the factory's boiler suddenly broke down, and they couldn't process any sugar. It had broken down before, and the usual practice was to go to the city to find an expert and have them come fix it. The round trip would take about a week. The sugarcane would pile up there, and after a while it would just spoil. But when it was ruined, nobody really took it seriously before. That was just the normal way of handling things. But this year was different. Chu Shijian walked around the boiler several times with his hands behind his back, sized things up pretty well, then took off his jacket, grabbed some tools, and dove right in. The boiler had just been shut down not long ago, and the temperature was still very high. They were in the middle of pressing over there when it suddenly stopped. Hadn't been stopped for very long. He just crawled right in. The people outside stared wide-eyed. What's going on here? Is the Supreme Lord Laozi refining elixirs or something? A few minutes later he came out, dusted off the dirt from his body, and said to those guys outside, "You little bastards. You lazy bastards standing around watching the show. I went in for 3 minutes and fixed it. Turn it on, start it up." The technician went to check. It really was fixed. At that time the boiler was still hot. The temperature was still quite high, so they immediately seized the moment and restarted it. Basically, the sugar extraction process wasn't affected at all. Just from that one incident, his status at the factory shot up another notch. He was both the boss and a hidden master. How could a vice director understand technical matters like that? How did he know about boilers? How did he understand boilers? Actually, he'd studied all of this beforehand during his inspection trips. He learned everything he needed to learn. Most of the time you see him acting all casual and effortless, but when it comes to the details, he knows everything inside out. If you don't understand these things yourself, you simply can't manage people. If you don't know what you're doing, people will just play you for a fool. But he really knows his stuff. But with this boiler issue, even though they fixed it this time, it would break again next time. Break, then fix, then break. This went on for several years straight. This issue gave him a headache too. He couldn't keep dealing with it like this forever. It would definitely affect production. So, he decided to just replace the factory's boiler with a new one. Replacing the boiler was a major undertaking, a huge capital expense. After running all the numbers, they were still short 50,000 yuan just to build the tall smokestack for the whole setup. Asked the county. The county couldn't come up with it. The factory had no money either. So what to do? Anyone else would have just thrown in the towel. Well, let's leave it at that for now. Or we'll deal with it when the county has money later. Not him. When the county couldn't handle it, he went straight to the city leaders and made a military pledge. After we build this, I can increase production by this much. I can earn you this much more money. The leadership was moved. The 50,000 yuan was secured. After getting the money back, he sent people to Kunming to buy fire bricks for building the chimney. But 2 groups he sent both returned empty-handed. Not a single brick bought. They said there wasn't any. He said, "You guys can't buy it. Well then, I'll go take a look myself." By the time he got there, it was almost closing time, and they were really impatient. "What do you want? From the sugar mill? Didn't 2 groups of you already come by? I told you already we don't have any, now get going." He didn't say anything, just walked around the factory in a circle. After circling around, he went back to find that person. "Don't lie to me. I saw it with my own eyes. You've got a huge pile stacked in your backyard. How can you tell me you don't have any?" The other person heard this and said, "Oh, so you can recognize fire bricks. But I'm telling you, it's not that I don't want to sell them to you. Those are all substandard defective products. Even if you buy them, you won't be able to use them. They're all damaged." And in fact, they really were defective products. But Chu Shijian said, "No worries. Could you just take me to have a look first?" Walking closer, picking them up, roughly gesturing and calculating in his head like this, although they were defective products, they weren't quite as defective as claimed. There might be some size variations here and there, but they still look usable. Just use a bit more cement when laying the bricks to fill in the gaps, and you're good to go. He said, "I want all of these. Give them all to me." When they heard that, they couldn't have been happier. These were all defective products that were going to be thrown away anyway. If you really want them, fine, buy us. They loaded all the bricks onto trucks right then and there and hauled them back. Would chimneys built from these salvaged bricks actually work or not? Facts proved they lasted all the way into the 1990s. After getting the infrastructure sorted out, the next step was implementing a new management system. Back then, everything ran on the big pot model, and he wanted to transform it into a performance-based system where you got paid according to your work. The more you did, the more you earned. Strictly speaking, that wasn't allowed. Back then, it was still a planned economy. You couldn't do more work, more pay. You had to stick with the communal pot system. If you tried to implement payment based on work performance, you could be labeled a revisionist at any moment. Once you were labeled a revisionist, there was no question about it, the next wave of struggle sessions would definitely begin. But he pushed forward with the reforms, despite the pressure. Nobody reported him. Everyone quietly complied, keeping it to themselves without spreading the word or exposing it. Why? Because it worked. Everyone benefited from it. More work, more reward. Those who work more are definitely willing, they benefit from it. But what about those who work less? Those who work less get correspondingly less. So why are they still willing? You have to look at it comprehensively. There must be benefits for them too, or they wouldn't keep quiet about it. Where are the benefits? They can also gain advantages from other areas. And Chu Shijian had one rule. How do you manage people? Today, he did a poor job. You dock him 10 yuan. Tomorrow you need to find where he did well, and in other areas, find ways to reward him an extra 30 yuan. Don't offend these people. The goal isn't to bring people down. The goal is to make them genuinely willing to work. But even with more pay for more work, it's still within limited bounds. Like dancing in shackles, there won't be much real difference. So, how could we actually benefit all the workers? Increase the benefits. This was also not allowed back then. Providing workers with additional benefits beyond what the state required could easily give someone leverage against you, if you weren't careful. But he was skilled at creating possibilities within impossibilities and finding opportunities where none existed. In 1966, Mao Zedong issued a May 7th directive. He dug out some parts from it that could be useful. Basically, it encouraged various industries to engage in some sideline businesses to meet their own needs. He seized upon this point and specifically assigned people to clear wasteland for farming and raise pigs. When raising pigs, he used the leftover residue from boiling sugar. Something they used to feel was such a waste. Now it had a purpose. They fed it to the pigs. After eating that stuff, the pigs grew nice and fat. The pig manure was used as fertilizer for growing vegetables, creating an effective cycle where nothing went to waste. And when it came to taking people to catch fish now, that made him really happy. He was exceptionally good at it. After catching fish and bringing them back, he'd improve everyone's meals. He ran that cafeteria incredibly well. In the past, the cafeteria served meat maybe once a month. What the state provided was limited. Now they slaughter a pig every week, and each family only needs to pay 50 cents to get a big ladleful to take home eating meat until they're stuffed. The neighboring factories are drooling with envy. Some people said, "How can you do this? How can you carry on like this? This is revisionism." He said, "No, Chairman Mao's supreme directive tells us to engage in sideline production. This is what you call using the rules to beat the rules." Not only did he run the cafeteria well, he also built housing for the workers. He called in the infrastructure chief. "How long to build 3 buildings for me?" The infrastructure chief said, 3 buildings? Well, based on our past experience, that'll take 3.5 years. You're here now. You know the business. How about I give you 3 years? I'll even shave off that half year for you. What do you say? When he heard that, he said, 3 years? Give me 3 months. If you can build it, then build it. If you can't, then leave, but you still have to build it for me. The other side heard this and thought, "You're going to strong-arm us? That won't work. We don't dare take on this job. Perhaps you should find someone else. We can't do it." "We can't finish it in 3 months," he said. "So, you can't do it? Fine, I won't use you anymore." He pulled out immediately and went looking for an outsourced contractor. Searching for someone capable on the outside, ended up finding a construction crew from a village, led by the village party secretary. They did really solid work, had done renovations for the factory before, and the whole job was very satisfactory. When we asked them how long it would take, they said, 3 months. We'll get it all done for you. What was originally supposed to take 3.5 years got built in just 3 months, and the quality was even better than before. From the time he arrived there for over a decade afterward, the factory kept building housing, continuously improving the workers' living conditions. Why were people willing to follow him? Because he didn't just pay lip service to serving the people. He genuinely made everyone's lives better. Now, let's take a look at Chu Shijian and his wife. When they first arrived at the sugar factory, what they were thinking about was when they could leave. After all, this was a relatively isolated place in the mountains. His wife, a city girl from the big metropolis, struggled to adjust at first. But by this point, she basically didn't want to leave anymore. He'd been working here for over 10 years now, had everything down pat, and the workers really respected him. Mountains, rivers, he could even go down to the stream to catch fish. He felt this was pretty good, maybe he'd just stay here for the rest of his life. But often at times like these, the plot takes a turn. Time came to 1979, and reform and opening up began. Chu Shijian was completely exonerated, and even that label of rightist, whose hat had been removed, was gone entirely. He had worked there for over a decade, and the sugar factory was thriving. He was just preparing to install a brand new white sugar production line. Previously, they only made brown sugar. The white sugar process was far more complex than brown sugar. He was rolling up his sleeves, ready to make a big push and take things to the next level, when suddenly, a transfer order arrived. The reform and opening up had begun, and talented people were needed everywhere. Chu Shijian's capabilities were right there for all to see. Bigger stages needed him, and in fact, several stages were competing to have him. 3 options, all in Yuxi. First, return to work at the prefectural committee, which was equivalent to going back to the municipal committee, entering the system. He refused, finding it meaningless. He still preferred doing practical work. Second option, director of the cigarette factory, moving from deputy director of a small-town sugar factory to become director of the large Yuxi cigarette factory. Third option, party committee secretary at a coal mine. Most people figured he would definitely go for the cigarette factory director position. After all, it was technically a city-level enterprise, and it was in the city itself, a good place to be. Though the benefits weren't great, and it was a step down from the mining operation, the mine was still pretty isolated up there in the mountains. But he wanted to go to the mining operation. Why? The reason you might find hard to imagine it was because he could go hunting. Although he might not necessarily get to fish, he could hunt. This was another hobby of his. He loved that natural environment. It let him feel more comfortable, more free. It's not that he lacked the wisdom to deal with people, but he simply didn't want to. After spending so much time in the cowshed, the vast natural world brought him more comfort. But in the end, he didn't go. Why? His wife didn't want to. The young lady from the big city, when she heard they'd have to go deep into the mountains again, refused, no matter what. And more importantly, their son was getting older and needed an education. He had to go to school. Education was a very real, practical concern. Even so, his wife still respected him and went with him to inspect that mining site in the mountains. After the inspection, the two of them finally made their decision to go to the cigarette factory and become its director. This cigarette factory was the Yuxi cigarette factory. This was where he would truly shine and become known to the world. Speaking of which, Yunnan has an inseparable bond with tobacco. Many places in Yunnan have exceptionally high-quality tobacco, but the one truly called the home of Yunnan tobacco is Yuxi. Sounds like a pretty good gig, right? Actually, it was incredibly difficult. As I mentioned earlier, the cigarette factory's performance wasn't even as good as that mine. The organization was extremely bloated, productivity was very low, wages were meager, and the morale of all the workers was terrible. Actually, it wasn't just here. Tobacco factories across the country were pretty much the same back then, and the interpersonal relationships were indeed quite complicated. Although the reform and opening up had already begun, the tobacco factory's leadership team consisted of 12 people in total, with only 2 being veteran revolutionary cadres who, like him, had been transferred from the military. The other 10 were all promoted from within, and all 10 were former rebels. Even though it was already 79, the combative atmosphere from that era still lingered to some extent, and the 2 sides remained at odds with each other. Want to get any work done? Tough. The attitude was basically, go ahead and try. I'm a dead pig that doesn't fear boiling water. Let's see what tricks you can pull, or what waves you can make. Go ahead, let's see what you can do. People also thought he was from some backwater place and looked down on him. He knew it wouldn't be easy to handle. So before he left, he first went to the prefectural party secretary to get himself a sword of authority empowered to punish corrupt officials high and low. The secretary said, "What's this? You want to execute the corrupt emperor above? Are you planning to chop me in half at the waist too?" No, that's not what I meant, boss. I'm just using a figure of speech. You know yourself, boss, how difficult this work is. The cigarette factory is deep waters with hard rocks, a long cave full of snakes and serpents. You're asking me to do the work, but you're not giving me the right tools to root out the bad apples and deal with troublemakers. Isn't that like forcing a duck onto a perch? I'm charging into battle on the front lines. Can't let me be the bird that gets shot for sticking its head out. If something happens to me, who's gonna be there to serve you hand and foot? Come on, give me your sword of authority. Give me one. And when the secretary heard this, all right, he agreed. How did he give it to him? The party secretary directly convened a working meeting of the local prefectural committee and had it written into the document in the form of meeting minutes. When he goes there to handle affairs for 1 year, whoever comes to the regional committee to report problems, you must hold them off for me. He must be given full authority to handle things, otherwise the work cannot proceed. Facts proved he had great foresight. The moment he arrived, they gave him a harsh welcome. They arranged a room for him. The new factory director arrived, and they assigned him a rundown place of about 20 square meters, 1 room plus a kitchen, 20 square meters total. Inside the room, there was just 1 bunk bed, and that single bed took up most of the space. You couldn't even fit a sofa by the door if you wanted to. He took one look, and his temper flared up instantly. Good grief, are you planning to raise turtles here? I've got a family of 3, and even a turtle shell would be bigger than this. By that time, his daughter had grown up and gone off to college. Later, they had a son who stayed with them. A family of 3, crammed into these bunk beds, him and his son sleeping on the top bunk, his wife on the bottom. That's how they spent their first night. The next day, the deputy party secretary, in charge of welfare from the cigarette factory, came to visit him and asked, "So, how is it?" He said, "You're giving me this room? Is this how big the ones you all live in are?" The deputy secretary said, "Mine is just a tiny bit bigger than this one." Zhang felt embarrassed. "Let me arrange something else for you, don't worry." In the end, they arranged for him a house that had been vacated after the previous factory director left slightly bigger, 48 square meters. At least it was brighter and more spacious than the old place, so he moved in. Actually, the overall conditions at the factory were really poor back then. Was that 20-something square meter place only given to him? Regular workers, Many of them lived like this. There were veteran employees who'd been there for years. 3 generations crammed into a 2.8 square meter place. The whole family. But at least that was still one family. There were also 2 families crammed into a single 2.8 square meter unit, separated by a hanging straw mat in the middle. The family living in the inner part had to pass through the outer family space just to get out. That's the kind of living conditions they had. Why? No efficiency, no profit, everyone eating from the same pot. Whoever worked harder was a fool. It could only spiral downward. After surveying the entire operation and understanding the situation, he summed up the state of UC cigarette factory at that time in one sentence. The employees were soft, scattered, and lazy. The workshops were plagued by running machinery, emissions, dripping, and leaking. After getting the complete picture and seeing everyone's state of mind, he felt angry, he felt heavy-hearted, and he felt excited there was work to be done again. This time, he knew he had something to do again. It was just like hunting and fishing. He was absolutely thrilled. Time to get to work. So, at the big assembly, in front of everyone, he said, "The fortune teller said I'm destined to achieve success over piles of bones, but I don't agree with that. I believe that when you're out here in this world, whether you live or die is up to you to decide. Let me be clear with you all. From the start, I'm here to get things done. If you do your job well, I'll back you up. But if you slack off or even try to sabotage me, I'll come after you. Remember, I don't repeat myself. Meeting adjourned. I laid it out there. In fact, many people didn't take it seriously at the time because they had already forced out several previous factory directors. But no one expected that as soon as he finished speaking, he immediately got to work. A group of people came up with all kinds of excuses not to show up for their shifts. He didn't say a word at the time, but when the end of the month came around, he docked their pay straight away. These guys weren't having it, so they went to the deputy director and said, "You gotta stick up for us here. What's going on? Why are you docking our wages?" The deputy director went to confront him, but as soon as he walked through the door, he pointed right at the deputy director's nose. "Yeah, I know what you're about to say. You know perfectly well what's really going on here. I'm telling you, if you back them up and let them stir up trouble in the factory, I'll take you down first. You believe me or not?" The deputy director was completely stunned by those words. This wasn't how things used to be. How does this factory director have such an attitude? Damn it, you think you can push me around because I've got no backing? Time to call in reinforcements. Head to the municipal committee to find my connections. As soon as he walked into the municipal committee to find his patron, the patron pointed at his nose and said, "I know what you're going to say. Let me tell you something in the current situation that doesn't work anymore. They've got the ultimate authority, so get lost." Just sent him packing right there. That's where having foresight really paid off. But at least he could still keep the deputy factory director in check. There was another one he couldn't control so easily, the party secretary. He was the factory director, but over there was the party secretary, who really had the final say. This party secretary was a textbook example of lazy, lax, arrogant, extravagant, incompetent, waiting around, relying on others, making demands, passing the buck, and dodging responsibility. He had a touch of every single one of these traits. A do-nothing cadre who takes no risks and does no real work. At that time, we happened to hit a very important juncture: wage reform. The reform and opening up had begun. The central government had a new spirit, wanting to adjust mechanisms in state-owned enterprises and give everyone a raise. But not everyone would get one, about 40% would. Everyone was thrilled when they heard this. A 40% chance seemed pretty good, but of course, some people wouldn't get raises. The issue wasn't about how much the increase would be. The issue was who would get it and who wouldn't. Over the past 20+ years, there hasn't been a single raise. If you miss this one opportunity and someone doesn't get the increase, won't they hate your entire family to death? At first, their approach was pretty similar. They'd hold high-level meetings and draft up a proposal that was basically equal distribution, allocating it down to each department at a 40% ratio across the board. But many people were dissatisfied. One time, they even surrounded the factory leadership's offices. After surrounding the office, the party secretary walked out holding a teacup. "What are you doing? If you have issues, go talk to factory director Chu. I'm leaving now." After saying that, he just left and claimed he was sick and hospitalized. Wouldn't take any responsibility for the risks. And while he was in the hospital, he certainly wasn't idle. He spent most of his time quietly gathering materials to file complaints everywhere, saying things like, "Look how poorly the leadership handled this situation. Look at how the leadership mishandles relationships with employees, getting people blocking the doors. You just can't let him continue in this position." Chu Shijian originally thought he was just timid, reluctant to take responsibility. But it turned out, "What are you pulling this stunt for?" He got angry. He went straight to the city government to find the party secretary. Just one line: "Either he stays and I leave, or I stay and he leaves. You choose." So, who left in the end? The secretary left. Taking advantage of the party secretary's departure, he also carried out a major reshuffle of the leadership team, removing everyone who couldn't get things done. When dealing with leaders, he relied on his imperial mandate. But when dealing with workers, he had to rely on real capability. He had a viewpoint. If you're a factory leader and you don't understand the technology, you don't know the characteristics of the production process, no matter how capable you are, you can only give blind commands. When outsiders try to boss around the experts, they get criticized left and right. You might think you're really something, that putting pressure on them will get the job done. But behind your back, they're cursing you out every which way. So you absolutely must understand the business. He put in the work himself, and anything that needed to be figured out, he could get crystal clear on it. One year, one of the 2 boilers in the factory broke down and needed major repairs. He asked the technical staff and maintenance people, "How long will it take you to fix this for me?" The technician said, "When the previous factory director worked on repairs with us, it took about 48 or 49 days. You've arrived, and you truly understand the technology. I'll give you an extra 8 or 9 days. I'll have it fixed for you in 40 days. How about that?" When he heard this, he said, "You think so? I see you look like you need 40 days. I'm giving you 4 days. If you can fix it, fix it. If you can't, then leave, but you still have to fix it for me." When they heard that on the other end, "What's this about? You're trying to force us? That won't work. Look, we don't dare take on this job. Either you find someone else, we can't fix it, we can't get it done in 4 days." He said, "So you can't fix it in 4 days? Didn't you say the previous factory director used to work on repairs with you? Come on, I'll fix it with you." He took off his coat and crawled right in. Although he didn't completely understand everything himself, he'd been there for so many repairs before and had studied it. He knew a bit about the technical details. He understood the technical details, at least a little bit. Most importantly, he got the system right. How did they repair things before? They dragged their feet and worked inefficiently. Now they divided it into several work stages, with each stage set up more reasonably, and everyone worked on the repairs together. He himself also worked alongside them. After 3 days of work, he himself couldn't hold up anymore. He went home, closed his eyes for a bit, and caught some sleep. Just as he woke up, someone came. "Manager, it's fixed! Good news!" The target was 4 days, and he led the team to fix it in 3.5 days. How could these people not be convinced? He went straight at them. "Didn't you say 48 days? Look, isn't it fixed now?" Those people were truly convinced by him. On one hand, he really put in the effort himself. And on the other hand, back in the day when we fought hard for 15 days and nights, the factory director wouldn't even give us a sip of thin porridge. Now, after just 3 days and nights, he's giving us such a big bowl of meat sauce rice noodles. The benefits are great, he said. Don't just think I'm giving you benefits while you're doing repairs. Now, if you get this job done well, everyone who participated in repairing the boiler will receive a bonus. This month, you'll get 4 extra days of overtime pay, and then everyone gets 4 full days off. Carrot and stick after a slap, you've got to offer a sweet date. Once the benefits are in place, everyone can settle down and focus on production. 2 major directions for boosting production. First, output. Second, quality. What do we rely on? First, equipment. Second, raw materials. This follows the same approach as the sugar factory earlier. The overall direction is similar, but with a larger factory, the difficulty is much greater. It's not like you can just collect some discarded scrap from people and refurbish it to make it work. So, what do we do this time? Go big with major orders, boldly go abroad for inspections, and import the most advanced equipment. But saying it is easy, it's not something he can just import whenever he wants. In those days, buying something from abroad was incredibly difficult. First, he had to get approval documentation, approval to purchase this equipment. Second, he had to get a foreign exchange quota. There were foreign exchange controls. Third, he needed actual foreign currency. He himself had to have the foreign exchange. At that time, he had no export business yet, no foreign exchange. Every step was a hurdle. He flattened all these hurdles one by one. How did he flatten them? He went to find leaders. He was especially good at finding leaders. This time was different though. He went to the provincial level to find leaders, because the city level ones couldn't handle it anymore. The provincial leaders can only protect your position as factory director, nothing beyond that. Go to the provincial leaders first, get things straight with them, and explain it in terms of numbers. If you approve this equipment for me, I'll deliver this much profit and tax revenue to you. The provincial level only looks at one metric. As long as you can pay more taxes, that's all that matters. It's a state-owned enterprise after all. He knows what benefits it brings to them. Otherwise, who's going to approve it for you? Providing value meant breaking through barriers not just externally, but internally too. Back at the factory, he still had to convince management, because it was too expensive. At that time, the equipment cost over 2.6 million yuan. For their factory, they simply didn't have enough money. They'd need to take out a loan. The factory officials got nervous as soon as they heard about taking out a loan. What if I take out this loan and the thing doesn't work? Look, the machine itself is fine, but if you don't have the skills for the job, if you bite off more than you can chew, what happens when you can't make it work? The overall supporting talent and everything, including whether the raw materials will even work or not, we still don't know. There's no certainty in our hearts. So he pulled everyone together and laid out the numbers for them. Let me break down these figures for you. Buy this inventory. With these 2 million plus in hand, I can pay off the loan in 3 to 4 months. Do you believe me or not? Every time he encountered this kind of situation, he would let the data do the talking, calculating everything down to the last detail. When management heard this, they thought, all right, we'll listen to you. They agreed. They bought the machine. That was over 2.6 million. But the story wasn't over yet. By 1984, the central government introduced another incentive policy, stating that some advanced enterprises could consider applying for foreign exchange quotas to import advanced machinery. He couldn't let this opportunity slip away. The moment he saw this notice come down, he immediately called together the senior leadership for a meeting. Everyone pulled out their pens and started calculating how much money should we apply for this time and what amount would the higher-ups approve. After running the numbers back and forth, they settled on a loan target of 10 million US dollars. This was already taking an enormous leap. The previous machine cost just over 2.6 million yuan, and now they were asking for a loan of 10 million US dollars. On the day of the application meeting, a scene they hadn't anticipated unfolded. They'd originally thought that the most powerful large enterprise would definitely apply for more. To their surprise, the quota they had originally planned to give to that company was declined, freeing up quite a bit. When Chu Shijian saw this, his mind started racing. During lunch, he called over his deputy and the accountant to run the numbers again, to see how much quota they had freed up. Could we possibly absorb some of their quota? After calculating everything back and forth, they finally reached a conclusion. The other side had freed up a total of $13 million in quota. He finally decided to request an additional $13 million, swallowing up their entire quota, taking it all, not wasting a single cent. The original $10 million had already taken enormous effort to secure, but this time, seeing the opportunity, without a second thought, I'm directly adding another $13 million, $23 million total. I'm going all in. He dares to ask for this money. Even the province doesn't dare to give it. The province was stunned. No way, we can't give you this. You were supposed to take one big step, and now you're saying you want to take one more step. That's 4 big steps total, a triple jump. What do we do? They couldn't approve it. So, he went back to his old playbook, finding a leader. Who did he turn to this time? The then vice governor of Yunnan province. Through persistent persuasion, he used his same old approach, letting the data do the talking, running the numbers for the leadership. This vice governor happened to be an exceptional leader with vision, courage, and the ability to truly understand him. He was persuaded by him, took the initiative to step in and coordinate on his behalf, and actually got it done. With the 23 million yuan credit secured, they began purchasing the machines one after another. From 1984 all the way through 1986, all the imported equipment was gradually tested, debugged, and put into production step by step. This set of equipment was the most luxurious lineup among all cigarette factories in the country at that time. With this equipment in place, the next step was raw materials. They imported the equipment, but when the tobacco leaf quality wasn't up to par, the machine's automatic detection system would just shut down and refuse to work. Even machines have their dignity. You're giving me such lousy materials, they're not worthy of my capabilities. He had once brought an expert along to the United States for a month-long study tour where he'd seen truly quality produce and witnessed firsthand how others cultivated it. He wanted to transplant that industrialized, refined cultivation method back home. But the problem was, he was the cigarette factory director, and tobacco leaves were under the tobacco company's jurisdiction. He had no authority there. When he went to discuss it with the tobacco company leadership, they shot him down directly. Just mind your own bowl of rice. Want to eat from mine? Dream on. Any ordinary person would have backed off after getting shut down like that. Not him. He came up with an even bolder plan. Merge both the tobacco company and the Monopoly Bureau into the cigarette factory system, creating a 3-in-1 entity. This was basically like telling them, come work under me. Who would agree to that? He went to the provincial party secretary and the vice governor, armed with data, talking about profits, taxes, and future prospects. The two leaders were convinced and helped him coordinate the merger. The first month after the merger, when payday came, the people from the tobacco company spent ages counting their money, absolutely thrilled. Why didn't you suggest this earlier? All parties were settled, there were no more obstacles, and they began planting tobacco leaves. His experimental fields averaged over 370 kilograms per mu, while the provincial average in Yunnan at that time was just over 240 kilograms per mu. Not only did yields increase, but quality soared as well. Upper, medium-grade tobacco leaves accounted for 80% of the crop, compared to just 20% in the fields that used to supply him. That's a fourfold difference. And the higher the grade of tobacco leaves, the more expensive the premium cigarettes made from them sell for, with profits 5 times that of medium to low-grade leaves. In 1987, the UC cigarette factory became #1 in the industry nationwide for the first time, based on all hard indicators, including revenue, profit, and tax contributions. In 1988, Hongmei, Ashima, and Hongtashan all became nationally popular brand names. Hongta Mountain in particular, starting from 1,986, sold for about 4 or 5 yuan a pack, then increased by 1 yuan each year, eventually reaching 10 or 12 yuan. And this was still holding back the price increases. If they hadn't restrained it and just followed pure market demand at the time, prices would have risen even faster. At the peak back then, 300 million people across the country were smoking cigarettes from their Yuxi cigarette factory. In the premium cigarette market, Hongta Mountain's annual sales not only surpassed all domestic cigarette brands, it captured 80% of the high-end market. What's even more remarkable, the 8 yuan Marlboro couldn't outsell the 9 yuan Hongtashan. A Chinese brand defeated an international giant on its own turf. Back then there was a legend going around. When people went to see officials to get things done, they'd carry 2 packs of cigarettes in their pockets, 1 pack of some off-brand for themselves to smoke. On the other side, you'd have a pack of Hongtashan. As long as you pulled out that pack of cigarettes, your request would definitely have a chance of getting done. But if one day you got nervous, your brain got muddled, and you pulled out the wrong pack, the deal was basically done for. That was the status of Hongtashan back then. By 1993, the Yuxi cigarette factory reached its peak. How much in taxes did it pay that year? 8.5 billion yuan. What does that mean? Equivalent to the combined annual fiscal revenue of 360 medium-sized agricultural counties, per capita profit and tax contribution was 2.24 million yuan, 5 to 10 times that of peers. Chu Shijian became the true king of tobacco in Asia. But nobody could predict the roller coaster fate had in store. We all know what happened next. After falling from the heights, when he returned to the public eye, it was already 2002. Many people assumed that this once all-powerful old man, after experiencing imprisonment, would face a cold reception where people scatter when the tea cools. But the reality was quite the opposite. From the very first day he returned home on medical parole, people were beating down his door. Why? Because fairness lives in people's hearts. The place where he later lived was not his old home in Huaning, but Daingjie in Yuxi. Remember I mentioned earlier, when he was the cigarette factory director, he handed many projects over to a trustworthy village party secretary? That village party secretary was named Ren Xinming, and the two became close friends despite their age difference. After Chu Shijian was released from prison, Ren Xinming didn't hesitate for a second and immediately brought him to Daingjie, arranging for him to stay in a standalone small building in the village. Back then you helped our village build roads and develop. You gave us so much support. Now that you've fallen on hard times, we'll take care of you. At that moment, Chu Shijian said with deep emotion, all the controversies and trials of those 4 years can be resolved in the presence of these old friends. Now, with a place to call home and old friends looking after him, you'd think a 75-year-old man riddled with ailments would finally settle into peaceful retirement, right? But Chu Shijian wouldn't have it. He couldn't sit still in that little building in Dang Street. In his mind, a scene from a few years back in prison kept replaying. Those were the darkest days of his life. One day, his younger brother Chu Shizuo came to visit him in prison. Chu Shijian was 14 years younger than him and had been working at the Citrus Research Institute back in their hometown since the 1980s. During that visit, his younger brother brought in a batch of rock sugar oranges he'd introduced from Yunnan, specially taking them into the prison for his older brother to try. Chu Shijian peeled one open and took a bite. The taste was good, but the texture wasn't quite top tier. It was this very orange that suddenly gave him, trapped behind bars, a glimmer of hope. He told his brother in prison, "This thing has potential, you should go back and study how to grow it properly." And just like that, he filed it away in his mind. This orange was like a seed that had been planted in his heart for a full 4 years. Now he was out. Standing before the barren mountains of Ailao, he told everyone, "I'm going to grow oranges." That year, he was 75 years old. He returned to the area where he had once worked as deputy director of the sugar mill right nearby, contracting land in the Ailao Mountains to start growing oranges. Why mountainous land? Having spent so many years in Yunnan, his connections were still there, so finding a piece of flat land wouldn't have been difficult at all. But he said, "Yunnan has so many mountains, it's not easy for farmers to find flat land to grow food. Food is more important than fruit. Let the farmers keep the flatlands for growing grain, and I'll go carve out some new land in the mountains." Everyone thought he'd lost his mind. "You're 75 years old, your body riddled with illnesses. Just cultivate 3 or 5 acres, keep yourself busy." That would have been enough. But no one expected that when he decided to do something, he was going all in. Right from the start, he leased 1,500 acres with his brother, 2 entire hilltops, at 280,000 a year for a 30-year term. Over 8 million yuan, just like that, thrown down. Where did he get that kind of money? He didn't have it. He borrowed it. Scraped together over 8 million from those old friends. Told them, "When I make money, I'll pay you back." Those old friends told him, "If you make money, pay us back. If you don't, forget about it. What you've done for us is worth more than this money." Starting in 2002 and continuing through 2003, we acquired and planted roughly 2,400 acres of orange groves. Later, they continued to expand gradually, and by 2022, it had grown to 6,800 acres, nearly 7,000 acres. Now, you'd think planting oranges would be straightforward, right? Just plant them and be done with it. He brought in the varieties, had the seedlings ready, and just planted them. But he's not your average person. Right from the land preparation stage, he did things differently from everyone else. He rented an excavator and drove it straight up to the mountaintop, using mechanized methods from the very beginning to deeply dig and transform the land. The mountain terrain was tough to work with. The mountain folks had never seen anything like this before. Who ever heard of bringing excavators in to do the job? Once the land was sorted out, the next step was to get the water supply figured out. Water sources in the mountains were hard to manage. After surveying the surrounding area, they found 2 rivers, but the water flow wasn't stable. In the end, they found a waterfall in an even more distant location, spent over 1.3 million yuan, and installed 2 water pipes from the waterfall to bring water to the orchard. 19 kilometers of water pipes, costing over 1.3 million yuan just to bring water into the mountains. This was absolutely unprecedented in China's agricultural sector at the time, setting a completely new precedent. With the water problem solved, he brought in professional frontline workers to start developing the techniques. He set up a dedicated department called the Production Technology Department, established several experimental zones in the orchard, and conducted experiments with different fertilizer ratios and various cultivation methods. Then they would take the experimental results to the laboratory for comparative recording and analysis. Farming this land, from the very beginning, with the most scientific mindset and the most industrialized approach. and he was already in his 70s at the time. Wang Shi later said that when he went to see Chu Shijian, he saw those fields had just been planted, so he asked, "How many more years will it take before these bear fruit? When will they start producing?" Chu Shijian said, 5 or 6 years. Wang Shi did a quick mental calculation. By then, Chu would be over 80. But Chu Shijian's confidence and courage came from the fact that right from the start, he was doing something that would absolutely yield results. He gathered all the fruit farmers and his team for a meeting. "Brothers, listen carefully. The oranges we're growing won't be sold at the local farmers market. We're going to sell only the best oranges." And he wasn't just making empty promises. Every night, he'd stay up, researching and studying. At first, he had no idea what it meant to grow oranges, but he relied on his own research. Although he hired experts, he insisted on understanding it himself. He read all kinds of books and went through all kinds of notes. Whatever the experts had read, he would read every single book without missing one, then go down to the fields to find problems and come back to discuss with the farmers. Originally knowing nothing at all, after just 2 or 3 years, when it came to pruning alone, people said even veteran farmers with over 10 years of experience weren't any better than him. The fruit yield per tree went from an initial average of 3 to 4 kilograms to 40 to 50 kilograms by 2015, 4 to 5 tons per acre. What kind of level is that? In internationally advanced agricultural countries like the United States and Australia, the maximum mature yield per acre is roughly around 3 tons. He was able to achieve 4 to 5 tons, exceeding international standards. Of course, he encountered many problems along the way, issues like pests and diseases, declining yields. Solving these problems wasn't easy for him, but he showed real determination. Let me give you a small example. Initially, he planted 240,000 rock sugar orange trees, along with 50,000 Wenzhou mandarin trees. But later he discovered the yield was dropping. All these years of growing oranges, it had always been 140 trees per acre. So he started thinking, could it be that they're planted too densely? He set aside a plot of land to test and found it really was too dense, so they needed to cut them down. The farmers couldn't bear to do it. The trees were about to bear fruit, and now they had to chop, cut them all down. Who could stand that? He said, "I'll pay you to cut them down. I'll give you 30 yuan for each tree you cut, 40 yuan per tree." They went from 140 trees per acre down to 80 trees. 4 or 5 years had passed. They were just about to bear fruit, but he cut them down. After the cutting, the overall yield actually did go up. What's even more extreme was those 50,000 Wenzhou mandarin orange trees, also 4 or 5 years old, just about to bear fruit, cut down every single one. Why? He took a look at the market and felt that this variety would face too much competition going forward and probably wouldn't yield good results. So he cut them all down, regrafted them, and switched to rock sugar oranges. The grafted trees could bear fruit by the second year. These decisions were basically right every single time. He started making his move in 2002, and by 2007, he had basically paid off all the money he'd borrowed. 5 years, that new batch had just started bearing fruit. At first, there was just a small batch. Slowly, things started turning around, and there was a bit of cash flow. What did he mainly rely on during these years? His old friends from the tobacco factory days. Some had become managers now. Others he'd done business with before they bought in bulk from him. The first batch of seed users was easily secured through his own friends, but he thought, I can't rely on friends forever. I've achieved this level of quality. I can absolutely carve out my own territory in the market. By 2009, profits broke through 10 million. That year, all shareholders received dividends for the first time. Back then, basically just selling in the areas around Yunnan was enough to move all the inventory. The surrounding markets started to get wind of it, but when he sold outside the area, he didn't use the Chu Shijian brand. He kept a relatively low profile, after all, given everything that had happened before. But the distributors started using his name, Oranges Grown by Chu Shijian. When people heard that, they thought, I've got to try these. Through this, the oranges started to sell, gradually spreading from Yunnan to the entire country. He and his wife couldn't manage it all on their own anymore, so they called their granddaughter back home. The granddaughter had just graduated from studying abroad and originally wanted to start a small business in Canada. He told his granddaughter straight up, if you go out there working, you'll drain 6 families' savings. If you come back home and rely on us, it's just adding one more set of chopsticks. Come on back, aren't we all going to end up in the same ground anyway, no matter where we are? That same line again. After the couple returned, the overall sales operations were basically handed over to them to take primary responsibility for. Later, Ben Lai Life opened the first door for them in internet sales. They posted his story and brought in dozens of tons, and unexpectedly, it sold out quickly. The second year they ordered again. The third year they ordered again, and this path opened up. By 2014, revenue exceeded 100 million, with a net profit of 70 million. 2,400 acres of oranges, with a net profit margin of 70%. By 2022, it grew to 6,800 acres, producing 27,000 tons. He didn't just succeed himself, he essentially set an example for China's entire fruit-growing industry. When Wang Shi spoke about him, he quoted General Patton's words, "To measure a person, you must look at how high they bounce back after hitting rock bottom." On March 5, 2019, Chu Shijian passed away in Yuxi at the age of 91. In the final years of his life, whenever someone asked him about the secret to his success, he would always pause for a moment, then say something that puzzled the questioner. In this life of mine, I just looked at the dirt beneath my feet a few more times than others. That statement might just be the answer to the question we posed at the beginning. Why do some people never get back up after they fall, while others manage to rebuild their kingdoms from the ruins? The answer isn't up in the clouds, it's down in the dirt. Those who can't get back up keep their eyes fixed on the heights they once occupied when they fall, gazing at the glory they lost, staring at the injustice of fate. Their knees may be on the ground, but their souls hang suspended in midair, unwilling to look down at what lies beneath their feet, unwilling to reach out and touch those humble, fragmented, the only real things in this moment. But Chu Shijian was different. When his father died, and he was 15, he looked down and saw the corn and the furnace fires in the distillery. At age 30, when he was labeled a rightist, he looked down and saw the sugarcane waste and flocks of ducks on the farm. At 71, imprisoned behind bars, he looked down and saw the orange his younger brother had brought him. Every time fate threw him into the mud, he never looked up at the heavens to ask why, but instead lowered his head to carefully study that patch of earth, its temperature, its moisture, what it could grow, and then he actually grew something from it. This isn't some motivational fluff, this is a survival principle. An old man verified over 91 years. When you've lost everything, the only thing you can do is to take seriously whatever little you have left in front of you. Even if that's just an ear of corn, a stalk of sugarcane, a single orange. He once said, "I've never let myself be defeated." It sounds like he's talking about willpower, but he's not. What he really meant was, "I've never let myself sit idle." In the cowshed, he raised ducks, brewed wine, and grew vegetables. In prison, he read books, took notes, and studied the sugar content of oranges. On the barren mountain, he dug soil, channeled water, and counted the fruit yield on every single tree. He had no time for despair. Or to put it another way, he took all the time that should have been spent in despair and used it to observe, calculate, and improve instead. This reminds me of a habit from his younger days. He always carried a small notebook with him, recording every detail of the winemaking process. That habit stayed with him his entire life. Even in the final years of his life, he still went to the orchard every single day, still crouched down to examine the color of the soil, still broke open an orange, using his tongue to sense whether the sweet-to-sour ratio met the standard. The 91-year-old tobacco king of Asia, squatting on Yunnan's red earth, examining an orange like an old farmer. This scene is the footnote of his entire life. Some people say he's China's most inspirational entrepreneur, but I don't think that assessment is quite accurate. He's not inspirational, he's pragmatic to the extreme. He never believes in miracles, only in patterns. He never placed his hopes in fortune's favor, only believed in what his own hands could grasp. When everyone else was gazing up at the stars, he was always looking down at the road beneath his feet. Sometimes that path was the boiler at the sugar factory, sometimes the assembly line at the cigarette plant, sometimes the red earth on a barren mountain. But no matter what it was, he would squat down, take a good look, and then get to work. When he passed away in 2019, the oranges on Ilau Mountain were ripening. Golden fruit hung heavy on every branch, like countless tiny lanterns, illuminating every inch of ground he had once walked upon. That was the final answer he left for this world. Not everyone who falls can stand back up, but those who truly stood back up, without exception, had all seriously lowered their heads and seen clearly the mud beneath their feet. Thank you for being with us all this time. This is The Soft Crash. We look forward to your comments, likes, and subscriptions. See you next time.